She was already running on empty before the gala even started. That's the part nobody tells you about surviving in New York. That's sometimes the thing that changes your life forever, happens on the worst possible night. The night you are exhausted down to the marrow. The night your hands won't stop shaking. You told yourself, just get through this one shift and everything will be fine. Al Davis had told herself that exact thing 17 times before she even pinned her name tag on. She would tell herself that 17 more times before the night was over. And none of it would matter, because the night had already decided what it was going to do to her. She just didn't know it yet. Stay with me, because what happened inside that ballroom in the next 4 hours? Nobody walked away from it the same. Nobody. The Grand Whitmore Hotel in Manhattan was the kind of place that made ordinary people feel small on purpose. 50-foot ceilings, chandeliers that cost more than most people's houses, a guest list for the Whitmore charity gala that read like a collection of names the rest of the world only ever saw on Decas magazine covers. Al had worked 3 of these events before. She knew the rules. Smile, but not too much. Move, but not too fast. Be present, but invisible. Refill the champagne before anyone asks. Do not make eye contact with the men whose watches cost more than your rent. She knew every single rule. She had followed every single rule. And on this particular Friday night in October, with the rain coming down hard outside, and her feet already aching from 6 hours of prep work, she was following every rule still. Right up until the moment her body decided it was done. She hadn't eaten since 7 a.m. It was now past 10 p.m. She'd been moving since 0 inches the afternoon, setting tables, polishing glasses, carrying trays that weighed more than she wanted to admit. And somewhere between the 3rd round of hors d'oeuvres and the main ballroom service, the room had started to tilt. She noticed it the way you notice things when you're trying not to notice them. A slight pull at the edges of her vision. A warmth in her face that didn't match the cold air-conditioned ballroom. Her tray felt heavier than it should. Her next step felt longer. She told herself water. She told herself, just make it to the service door. She told herself 15 more minutes. She told herself all of it, and none of it was enough. Because right in the center of the Grand Whitmore ballroom, in front of 50 of the most beautiful women she had ever seen in her life, models flown in from California and Washington, and places with names she'd only read about, Al Davis's legs gave out. The tray left her hands first. Then the floor came up to meet her, and the sound of shattering crystal rang out across the ballroom like a bell that could not be unrung. He had walked past all 50 of them. That was the thing people talked about afterward. Marco Rossi had entered the Grand Whitmore ballroom at exactly 10:14 p.m., and he had walked the entire length of it without stopping once. Past the Prosids, models in the designer gowns. Past the socialites who had spent weeks engineering a reason to be in his eyeline. Past the business associates who had tried to catch his attention. Past every single person in that room who had wanted something from him. He walked through them all like smoke through a window, unmoved, unreachable. Marco Rossi was 35 years old and had not been surprised by anything in a very long time. His bodyguard, Leo, walked 2 steps behind him. His expression said he was already thinking about leaving. He reached the center of the room, and that was the exact moment Al's tray hit the marble floor. He stopped, not because of the sound, not because of the commotion, not because 50 heads turned at once. He stopped because she fell, and something in his chest, something he had spent 11 years building walls around, cracked clean open before he could stop it. He was moving toward her before he had decided to move. That was only the beginning. Nobody moved fast enough. That was the first thing Marco noticed as he crossed the ballroom floor. The event staff stood frozen, trays in hand, eyes wide, doing the particular paralysis of people who didn't know whether helping would get them in trouble. The model stepped back, not toward her, back as if proximity to something messy was itself a risk. A hotel manager in a black blazer was speaking urgently into an earpiece, but had not taken a single step toward the woman on the floor. The whole room had turned to look, and not one person had moved. Marco Rossi reached her in 11 seconds. He had counted without meaning to. He crouched beside her, before Leo could say a word, and he put 2 fingers to her wrist, not gently, precisely, and felt her pulse fast, thin, present. He looked at her face. Deep, brown skin, natural hair half loose from the pin that was meant to hold it, uniform rumpled from hours of work, lips slightly parted, lashes against her, cheekbones, not unconscious, not quite. Her eyes were trying to open and not succeeding. Her lips moved. He leaned closer. She said very quietly, "I'm fine." He almost said something he hadn't said to anyone in years. He said it anyway. "No, you're not." Leo appeared at his shoulder. "Sir," the word carrying 11 different meanings at once. All of them versions of "what are you doing?" and I need to leave and this is not your problem." Marco didn't look up. "Get Dr. Esposito, his personal physician, not the hotel's." Leo paused 1 beat too long. Marco looked up then, and the look was enough. Leo was already on his phone, before he turned away. The hotel manager had finally appeared at Marco's elbow, apologizing in rapid, anxious sentences about the inconvenience, about calling an ambulance, about the hotel's protocol. Marco looked at him once. "Clear the area." The manager blinked. "I'm sorry. Clear the area." The voice that had ended, "Careers with less." The manager cleared the area. A space formed around them, the crowd pulling back like a tide, and for a moment in the middle of the grand Whitmore ballroom, it was just Marco Rossi crouching on the floor and a woman in a waitress uniform trying to convince him she was fine. Her eyes opened fully, dark, sharp, immediately embarrassed. She started to push herself up and he put one hand on her shoulder, not forceful, just present, and said, "Don't." She looked at him, really looked at him, and something moved across her face that wasn't fear and wasn't gratitude. It was the particular expression of someone recalibrating extremely fast. "You don't need to," she started. "Dr. Esposito is on his way," he said. She stared at him. "I don't need a doctor. I need water, and a granola bar, and for the floor to stop moving." He reached 2 fingers up, without looking away from her, and someone Leo anticipating put a cold bottle of water in his hand within seconds. He held it out. She looked at the water, then at him, then at the water. She took it. Their fingers didn't touch. It felt like they did anyway. What she said next almost made him smile for the first time in months. She said, "You just cleared an entire ballroom because a waitress fainted, didn't you?" He said, "The ballroom needed clearing." She said, "That's to not an answer." He said, "No, it isn't." And he watched something shift in her expression, the embarrassment dissolving into something more careful, more curious, and he felt it again. That crack in the wall, wider now. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know she was 28 years old and had been working double shifts for 6 weeks straight to cover her younger sister's medical bills. He didn't know she had a degree she wasn't using, a studio apartment in the Bronx that she loved fiercely, and a best friend named Solange in Connecticut who was going to lose her mind when she heard about this. He didn't know any of it. He only knew she was sitting on the floor of his event with a water bottle in her hands, telling him she was fine when she clearly wasn't, and looking at him like she was trying to figure out the angle. Like people always had angles, like she had learned the hard way that they did. He recognized that look. He had perfected it himself. He didn't know her name, but he already knew something true about her, and that had not happened to him in a very long time. But what he discovered in the next 20 minutes changed everything. Dr. Esposito arrived in 4 minutes. A small Italian man in his 60s who had been Marco's family physician for 15 years and had learned not to ask questions at unusual hours in unusual locations. He examined Al with quiet efficiency while she sat against the wall of a private anteroom off the main ballroom. A room Marco had commandeered with 2 words to a hotel staff member who had not argued. Her blood pressure was low, her blood sugar lower, exhaustion compounded by dehydration, Dr. Esposito said, and then looked at Al with the specific gentleness of a man who had seen this before. When did you last eat a full meal? Al opened her mouth, closed it. Yesterday, she said. Not quite. Dr. Esposito didn't react visibly, but the slight tightening around his eyes said enough. He spoke to Marco quietly in Italian. Marco listened without expression. Then he looked at Al and said, You need food and rest. She said, I need to finish my shift, he said. Your shift is finished. She looked at him like he had just said something in a language she didn't speak. Excuse me. He looked back at her, steadily. I own this hotel. The silence that followed was one of the more interesting silences Marco had experienced recently. Al stared at him. He watched her process it. The recalibration again. Faster this time. Sharper. She was smart. He had already noticed that. She said, You own the Whitmore. He said, among other things. She said, And you're telling me my shift is finished? He said, I'm telling you that you collapsed on my ballroom floor, and your blood sugar is low enough that Dr. Esposito is giving me a look. I don't enjoy receiving. She glanced at Dr. Esposito, who was studying his medical bag. With great interest, she looked back at Marco. I don't need you to fix this, she said. The words were quiet, but they had edges. I've been handling my own problems since I was 19. This is just one bad night. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, I know. She blinked. He said, You've been working since 4:00 p.m. You set up the East Wing tables, restocked the bar twice. Covered for the staff member who called in sick at 7. You've moved more tonight than anyone else on the floor. He paused. I noticed before you fell. She was very still. Why were you watching me? He didn't answer immediately. The honest answer was complicated. What he said instead was, I notice things. It's a habit. She studied him the way she had in the ballroom, like a woman used to, finding the catch. She said, What's your name? He said, Marco Rossi. She said, Al Davis. He said, I know. She said, Of course you do. Food arrived, not from the gala. That food was performative, beautiful, insufficient. Marco called the hotel kitchen directly and requested something real. What appeared was a bowl of pasta e fagioli, braised short rib, roasted vegetables, a pot of espresso. Al looked at it, then at him. He said, Eat, she said. You're very comfortable giving instructions, he said. And you're very comfortable being the only person in the room who ignores them. She looked at him for one long moment and then she picked up the fork. He watched her eat, not intrusively, just present. And something about the way she did it with the unself-conscious focus of someone genuinely hungry made the tight coil of tension he carried everywhere loosened by a fraction. Dr. Esposito excused himself. Leo was outside, the door, in the private anteroom off the Grand Whitmore Ballroom. Marco Rossi sat across from a waitress named Al Davis, while 50 people in the ballroom beyond wondered where he had gone, and he found that he did not care even slightly. She looked up from the bowl and caught him watching. He didn't look away. She said, Why are you still here? He said. I'm making sure you're all right. She said. You don't know me, he said. Not yet. She didn't know what that meant yet, but she would. He sent a car. That was the first thing. Al had refused politely, firmly, in the particular way of someone who had learned that accepting things from powerful men came with costs written in fine print. She had said, Thank you, and meant it, and then said she would take the subway, which she had taken every night for 3 years and would take again tonight. Marco said nothing. He had nodded. She had left. And when she walked out of the Whitmore side entrance into the October rain, there was a black car, idling at the curb. Not ostentatious, not a limousine, just a clean, quiet car with a driver who said, "Only Miss Davis." When she stopped, she stood in the rain for a long moment. She looked back at the hotel. She looked at the car. She thought about the subway at 11:30 p.m. in the public dock, wet shoes. She got in. She told herself it meant nothing. She was lying. She called Solange from the back seat. Solange answered on the first ring because it was almost midnight, and Al never called this late unless something had happened. What happened? Solange said, skipping hello entirely. Al told her there was a silence on the line. Then Solange said, "Marco Rossi." Al said, "I don't know who that is." Solange said, Al, Google him right now." Al said, "I'm not going to." Solange said, "Right now?" Al put the call on speaker and typed his name into her phone. The first result was a Forbes profile. The second was a Wall Street Journal article about the Rossi Group's acquisition of 6 Manhattan properties. The third was a photograph. Marco, suit, expression closed. A man who looked like he existed in a different category of human being than regular people. She scrolled. She found the careful language. Rossi Group's diverse portfolio. Rossi family's long-standing business interests. Sources close to the present. Family. The kind of phrasing that journalists used when they knew something they couldn't prove. Al read it all. Then she put her phone face down on the seat. Solange said, "So?" Al said, "So nothing." Solange said, "He sent you a car." Al said, "It's raining." Solange said, Al. Al said, "Good night, Solange." She ended the call. The car moved through Manhattan's wet streets, and she watched the city blur past the window, and she thought about a man who had crossed a ballroom in 11 seconds to crouch beside a waitress on the floor, while 50 other people stood and watched. She thought about the way he'd said, "Not yet," like it was a fact about the future, not a question about it. She had met men who spoke like that before. They were usually dangerous in ways that didn't show on the surface. She knew better. She had always known better. But here was the thing about Al Davis that most people missed because she was quiet about it. She had spent 6 weeks working double shifts without a single complaint because her younger sister Petra needed surgery, and the insurance wouldn't cover it. And Al had decided without discussion that she would cover it herself. She had done this while keeping her apartment, keeping her phone on, keeping her sister from knowing the full weight of what she was carrying. She had carried all of it, alone. And she had done it with the kind of steadiness that looked like ordinary but wasn't. She was not fragile. She had never been fragile. She had simply been running at a deficit for 6 weeks straight. And tonight, her body had finally sent the bill. What she didn't know, what she had no way of knowing was that Marco Rossi had spent 20 minutes on his phone after she left, finding out exactly why a woman with her work ethic was picking up emergency catering shifts at Hotel Gallas. And what he found had done something to him that an entire ballroom of engineered encounters had failed to do. It had made him feel something he had no framework for anymore. He wasn't done, not even close. She found the envelope under her apartment door at 7 a.m. Plain white. Her name on the front and handwriting that was controlled and unhurried. And she recognized it immediately because she had seen his signature on hotel paperwork. Leo had quietly brought in the night before. She sat down on the floor of her hallway in her sleep shirt and opened it. Inside was a card and a check. She looked at the check first. It was made out to Petra Davis. The amount was the exact cost of the surgery down to the dollar. She stared at it for a long time. Then she read the card. It said, "I looked into what you've been carrying. You should have asked someone for help. I know you won't agree with that. The check is not charity. Consider it a loan with no interest and no timeline. You don't owe me anything for it." Below that, a phone number. Below that, one more line. "But if you want to tell me I'm overstepping, I'd like to hear it in person. Breakfast today. Your choice of location. Marco." She read it 3 times. Then, she called Solange. Solange answered, already awake, and said before Al could speak, "Tell me everything." She met him at a diner in the Bronx. Her choice, her neighborhood, her terms. He arrived alone. No Leo, no car, no suit, dark, jeans, a simple gray pullover, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who had made an effort to be less intimidating and had partially succeeded. She was already in the corner booth with coffee when he walked in. She watched him scan the room, find her, and the thing that happened on his face when he did. Just for a half second before the controlled expression reset, was something she planned, filed away carefully. She slid the check across the table when he sat down. He looked at it, then at her. She said, "I can't accept this." He said, "You haven't. It's still on the table." She said, "Marco." He looked up when she used his name. She said, "I don't know what you think you know about me, but I've been handling Petra's situation, and I have a plan." And he said, "Your plan involves working yourself into collapse on a Friday night." She stopped. He said, it without judgment, without edge, just the clean delivery of a fact by someone who dealt in facts for a living. She said that was one bad night. He said it was the 7th double shift in a row. She felt the heat shift in her face. "How do you know that?" He said. "I own the staffing agency that contracts to the Whitmore." He paused. "I checked the scheduling records this morning." She looked at him. "That is an enormous invasion of my privacy." He said, "I know. I did it anyway because I wanted to understand." She said, "Understand what?" He said, "Why someone with your capability is running herself into the ground alone when she doesn't have to be?" The diner was loud around them. Her coffee was getting cold. She looked at this man across a Formica table in a Bronx diner and felt something she had specifically trained herself not to feel, like the ground under a long-held certainty was shifting. She pushed the check back one more time. He picked it up and put it in his pocket. He said, "I'll hold it." She said, "You are the most frustrating person I have ever met." He said, "I've been told." And, for the second time in 16 hours, the corner of Al's mouth moved before she could stop it. Not a full smile, just the beginning of one. He saw it, and the way he looked when he did, like he was going to remember it, made her heart do something inconvenient and completely unwelcome. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and it was the most at ease she had felt with another person in longer than she could measure. She excused herself to use the restroom. She took the long way back through the narrow hallway beside the kitchen, and that was when she heard it. Leo's voice, low and clipped, just outside the diner's back door on a call he clearly believed was private. She wasn't trying to listen. She slowed anyway. She heard 4 words that stopped her completely. He needs to sever a pause. All personal ties before the operation moves forward. Anyone close to him right now is a liability. The call ended. Silence. Al stood in that narrow hallway and felt the warmth she had been carefully, reluctantly allowing herself to feel go completely cold. Her jaw set. Her eyes went flat. She had known. She had always known. She smoothed her expression before she walked back to the table. She picked up her bag. She said, "I have to go." He looked up now. She said, "Yes." She said it without anger, without tears, without any of the things she felt moving through her chest like a current. She said it the way she said everything, hard, quietly, cleanly, with the particular stillness of a woman who had learned that falling apart was a luxury she could not afford. She left, the check on the table. She walked out of the diner. She did not look back. And Marco Rossi sat in the corner booth of a Bronx diner, watching the door close behind her, and felt for the first time in 3 weeks the room go completely empty. He didn't know what she'd heard, but he was about to find out. He called twice. She didn't answer. He texted once, just her name, nothing else, and she read it and set her phone face down on her kitchen counter and stood at 22 parters. to her window watching the Bronx street below, and told herself this was the right thing. This was the smart thing. This was what knowing better looked like in practice. She had felt the ground shift, and she had been right to be afraid of it. She had heard it from the person closest to him in his own words, without spin or softening. Anyone close to him was a liability. She was not going to be a liability. She was not going to be a consequence someone else paid. She had Petra to think about. She had herself to think about. She had spent enough of her life making herself smaller to fit into spaces that were never built for her. She was done doing that. She made tea she didn't drink, and she went to bed early, and she told herself that it already felt less sharp. She was lying again. Leo appeared at her door at 9 a.m. She opened it because she thought it was her neighbor, and then stood very still when she saw who it was. He looked at her, without expression, and said, "He didn't send me. I came on my own." She said, "I'm not interested." He said, "I know. I'm going to take 30 seconds anyway." She didn't close the door. He said, "The call you heard, it wasn't about you." She said nothing. He said, "There's an operation Marco has been running for 2 years, dismantling a distribution network that has been in his family structure since before he inherited it. It's the most dangerous thing he has ever done, and he is 3 weeks from finishing it. The personal ties he needs to sever are financial ones, business relationships that trace back to the people he's taking down. He said anyone close to him because he's been moving money, and those transactions needed to disappear before the final phase." He paused. "You were never the liability. You were the only thing in 3 weeks that made him hesitant to finish. Because finishing means exposure, and exposure now means you could get caught in it." Leo looked at her steadily. He came to that diner without security, for the first time in 4 years. He put a check in his pocket for a woman he met 3 weeks ago that he has never cashed and never will. "I've worked for Marco Rossi for 11 years. He said nothing. Then he left. Al sat on the floor of her hallway for the second time in 2 days. She sat there for a long time. Then she picked up her phone. Marco answered on the first ring. She said, "Leo came to see me." Silence. He said, "I told him not to." She said, "I know." He didn't listen. Another silence longer. Then she said, "Why didn't you just tell me?" He said, "Because it wasn't finished yet. Because telling you meant making you part of it, before I could guarantee you were safe in it." She said, "You were protecting me by keeping me in the dark." He said, "I was protecting you by keeping you out. There's a difference." She recognized the echo of her own words from the bridge. Not lonely, alone. And something in her chest turned over completely. She said, "When does it finish?" He said, 3 weeks, she said. "And then?" He said, "And then I would have told you everything." He paused. "I was always going to tell you everything." She believed him. That was the thing she hadn't expected. Not the explanation. Not Leo at her door. But the fact that when he said it, she believed it without having to decide to. Her throat tightened. She said, "I walked out of that diner." He said, "I know." She said, "I didn't let you explain." He said, "I know that too." She said, "I'm sorry." He said, "Don't be. You protected yourself. I would have done the same thing." She met him at the Whitmore that evening, not the ballroom. A quiet room on the 14th floor, with a window that looked out over Manhattan, going amber in the bright, late light. He was already there when she arrived. No suit jacket, sleeves, rolled. The version of him she had come to know in diners and anteroom kitchens. Not the version that walked through ballrooms without stopping. He looked at her the way he had looked at her since the beginning, like she was something true in a world full of performance. And she crossed the room, and she didn't brace, and she didn't calculate, and she didn't wait for the catch. She stopped in front of him. She said, 3 weeks. He said, 3 weeks. She said, "And then you'll tell me everything." He said, "Everything." She looked at this man, this complicated, careful, devastating man who had crossed a ballroom floor for her before he'd even decided to, and had been quietly arranging the world around her safety, Ever since, she said, I'm not going anywhere. Something moved across his face that she had never seen there before. Not the controlled surface, not the thing moving beneath it, but both at once, fully visible, nothing held back. He reached down and took her hand. Not slowly this time. Not carefully. Just directly. The way he did everything. When he stopped performing. Restraint. She held it. Outside the window, New York burned gold in the October evening, and neither of them said anything because nothing needed to be said. 3 weeks later, the operation ended. He told her everything. She listened to all of it. The empire, the inheritance, the years of trying to dismantle what he hadn't chosen. And when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. And then, she said, "You've been carrying this alone the whole time." He said, "Yes," she said. "You should have asked someone for help." He looked at her. He recognized his own words from the card he had left under her door. And something in his expression broke open completely. She said, "I'm here now." He said, "I know." She said, "Stop being alone in it." He looked at her across the table. This woman who had collapsed on his ballroom floor and then stood back up with more dignity than anyone he had ever met, who had walked out of a diner to protect herself and then called him back because she was brave enough to believe him, who carried everything silently and still had room to carry more. And Marco Rossi, who had walked past 50 extraordinary women without a second glance, and, frozen for one, understood for the first time that the thing he had felt crack open in his chest that night in the ballroom wasn't a warning. It was a beginning. He brought her hand to his mouth, pressed his lips to her knuckles, slow, deliberate, the way a man acknowledged something that mattered. She let him, and it felt like the only word either of them had for it. Home. If this story broke something open in you, you already know what to do. Hit subscribe right now. Drop a comment and tell me, were you screaming at Al to go back when she walked out? Or did you understand why she left? Because that comment section is about to be a war, and Marco and Al's story is nowhere near finished. What's coming in the next chapter is going to wreck you completely. See you there.